Welcome back to the Bryan Devore Connection. I'm your host, Bryan Devore. Many of the caregivers who care for seniors as they age are spouses. And unfortunately, the mortality rate of those caregivers is kind of high. So we want to have support for those caregiver spouses. So here to talk to us today about that topic and a variety of things is Kathy Gilbert. Kathy, thank you very much for coming today.
Welcome.
So let's first talk about who you are and what you do, kind of set the stage, and then we'll kind of talk about more in respect to spousal caregiving and so forth. So how did you get into this line of work, and what is that line of work that you do?
Okay. Well, I've been a social worker for over 38 years. And so how I got into this specific type of work is several years ago, I needed to place my mom in a facility. And at that time, there were probably resources, but that I didn't know about them. Fast forward, she ended up having Alzheimer's and realized as a social worker, and my siblings, all of us highly educated, knew very little about resources or anything. So after she died, I got the opportunity to lead a support group, actually where she lived and died, and for Alzheimer's San Diego. And that's kind of how I started giving back and realizing that there are a lot of resources, and just a lot of people don't know about them.
Yeah. Let's unpack that a little bit, because one of the reasons why I do this show is because there are a lot of people out there who do great work for seniors and their loved ones. And there are a lot of seniors and their loved ones who need those resources. They just don't know about each other.
Right.
So trying to connect those people with the resources. And I think one of the reasons why people don't know about them is they don't need to. You know, until it's a need,
Right.
they're not going to know about it. They're going to go on about their lives until they're dropped into it, which is what happened with you.
Right.
So it sounds like what you're trying to do is give back and help people not be in the same situation that you were in.
Not be alone, right?
Right,
Right.
exactly.
And there's so many resources and support, even though the system's not a great system in all other ways, but there's lots of resources available.
Yeah, for sure. So it sounds like when we were talking before on the phone about spousal support, you think about divorce, but support for spouses, when it comes to caregiving, that's something you've encountered in your work, is that right?
A lot, yes.
Okay, what does that look like?
It runs the gamut from people getting a diagnosis of their loved one to deciding when and if there's a time where they need to place their partner somewhere, all the family issues, becoming a caregiver from a partner to a caregiver, all the mixed feelings about it, the loss, lots of things. It's a long trajectory.
Right. So what kind of support is available? What kind of support do you give for those spouses who are dealing with that?
I give support in different ways. I have a lot of resources that I'm happy to give people in terms of help. I work a lot with individual spouses or caregivers in my practice in San Diego, helping them with all sorts of things, like what to do when their partner gets a diagnosis, dealing with the family having different viewpoints on what should be done. The caregiver usually is incredibly stressed, and there's a lot of guilt associated too with making decisions around a family member that needs to be placed. So a lot of the work I do is around people who do still live at home but then end up being placed because they're not able to be taken care of at home, and because a caregiver is tired and can't continue, or could continue but at their own risk.
Right. I forget the exact stat, but it's somewhere around 30 or so % of caregivers, they pass before the person they're caring for because of the stress, because of the physical labor it takes.
Right.
And you mentioned about working with the families, because you may have children who are all over the country or here, but they have different opinions of what should be done for mom or for dad than their caregiver does.
Right.
How do you navigate that?
Well, I work on both ends. So I work with the adult children with how to honor the parents and what they want and not boss them around because they're worried about their safety. So everybody means well and has good intentions. So a lot of times the adult child wants the caregiver to be safe and to be okay and wants to place the other parent for lots of different reasons. And so it's really about understanding each person's perspective, and they're pretty different from whatever position you have in the family. If you're a caregiver, you're a son or your daughter, and if you're the person who's looking at having to leave the home, has a whole different set of needs too.
Right. So let's talk about the placing of the loved one. Talk about the emotions and the help that you provide going into it, and then maybe after they're placed as well.
Well, there's usually a lot of ambivalence. So I work with people, hopefully even when there's no need for placement, and they don't even want to talk about it or think about it, but they go and look at them because people have a lot of misconceptions about what places are like these days. Yeah. So working with ambivalence and working with guilt, what they think they should do, what they can do, pressure, internal pressure probably more than familial pressure about, especially if people have been married many years and they've made a commitment to their spouse that for better or for worse, literally, figuratively, and they want to live with that, and it's not sometimes almost humanly impossible to do it. So working with them around all those things, and then in terms of placement, there's not a lot of information about figuring it all out, and then how you even go about having the person move to the facility, how do you explain it to them, how often you visit, they want to come home, they don't want to come home, all those things. So, and there's really very little individual support. There's lots of support groups that are really helpful, and educational things that are very helpful around all these issues.
Yeah. And I know it's especially difficult when it is an Alzheimer's or related disease situation, because it's educating the caregiver on what the journey even looks like, you know, how you communicate with them, because that person's not the same person, and help them try to at least understand that, which is not always easy. Tell me what a successful outcome looks like to you.
A successful outcome would be before a crisis. That would be the success. Yeah. Before anything tragic happens. That would be a really successful outcome, which is rare because people tend to try so hard to hang on. Yeah. So success would be somebody realizes their family member needs to be placed. People are in support of that. The actual person who's moving might not be happy about it, but they're actually either okay with it, or they're in a place in their progress where it's not traumatizing for them, and they go to a place that has really good care, and the family continues to be involved. So I think it would be the avoidance of a major crisis and planning, which is really hard to do, but possible, because it's doing it ahead of time.
Proactively.
Yeah.
Well, and that's sort of my mantra, is helping people be proactive in working with people like you when the emotions do start taking over, finding the resources that are available for them, all those things before it becomes a crisis mode, and then everyone's hitting 100 miles an hour trying to get this done. So, Kathy, thank you very much. Kathy's information is on screen for those of you who are watching on video. If you're listening as a podcast, of course, you can't see it, but it is in the caption information. But Kathy's information is there. We just scratched the sort of the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. There's a lot more information Kathy can provide for you or for a loved one. Kathy, thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge.
Thank you. Take care.